Welcome back, everyone, to the penultimate Conversation with Science session we're running here at the Forum at the New York Times Climate Hub. This is a series of sessions we've programmed to really bring climate science deeply into our agenda here. And what better way to introduce this next session, which is going to be moderated by Lauren Chin, Impact Coordinator at the University of Edinburgh. And she's going to be in conversation with a very special scientist who's here with us today. If you have virtual questions, please submit them through the YouTube chat, and we'll try and bring them into the room. And those who are with us in person, please prepare your questions that Lauren will turn to you once the conversation is over. Thank you, Lauren, and welcome to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for everyone for coming out. For those who do know me, welcome back. Great to see you all. And for those who don't, wonderful to be up here with you. So just a quick introduction on who I am before we jump into chatting with our esteemed and wonderful guest. My name is Lauren. I'm an impact coordinator at the University of Edinburgh Center for Business, Climate Change, and Sustainability. In addition to being a part-time student in Energy Society and Sustainability. So sustainability is kind of one of my big interests, in case you couldn't quite tell.
Could you say that one more time?
No. Sustainability.
Got that, yes.
And through BCAS, through the center that I work at, we've led this Innovator Initiative, which I'm so excited about, and love to invite all of you, both online and here in person, to join us at 5 p.m. in the Think Tank, where we'll be talking on our second of 3 sessions. But for now, I'm delighted to introduce our wonderful guest, quite an accomplished atmospheric scientist, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. So Catherine is the Chief Scientist for the Nature Conservancy and a distinguished and endowed professor of public policy and public law at Texas Tech University. You've got an academic background in physics and atmospheric science, and we're usually finding you online or in person explaining why climate change matters and what we can do to fix it, which is so important at the moment to get global support, I believe, behind climate change. So you're a remarkable communicator. You've won numerous awards. You're on numerous lists. Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, one of them, Fortune Magazine's World's Greatest Leaders, another. And most excitingly, you're here with us today to talk about climate change and communication. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, Catherine.
Thank you for being here.
And so I'd love to start off just to hear a little bit about you and why you've decided to focus on climate change and what our role, humanity's role, is for the future.
Yes, so my undergraduate degree is not in anything related to climate change at all. I studied astronomy and physics. And my plan was to be an astrophysicist. And in fact, I was already studying galaxy clustering around quasars. And if you look up my papers as a scientist, my first few papers are in the field of astronomy and physics. So what happened? What happened was that I needed an extra class to finish my breadth requirements. This is the importance of being a student and being educated. And I looked around, and there was this brand new class on climate change over in the geography department. I thought, well, that looks interesting. Because I had learned about climate change along with other environmental issues, like deforestation, biodiversity loss, air pollution, climate change. And I thought of those as issues that environmentalists care about and environmentalists work on, and the rest of us wish them well. But when I took that class, I realized that climate change was not only an environmental issue. I mean, of course, it is an environmental issue, but climate change is also an issue of hunger and poverty and resource scarcity. Climate change affects our health. Climate change affects the economy. It affects national security. Climate change touches on every single aspect of human life on this planet, to the point where climate change is truly an everything issue. And not only is it an everything issue, but though it affects all of us in different ways, depending on where we live, it disproportionately affects the poorest and most marginalized and most vulnerable people the most. It is profoundly unfair. And for me, that was what tipped the scales. When I learned how unfair it was, when I learned exactly who it's impacting, when I learned that the poorest 3.5 billion people in the world produce 7% of our carbon emissions, yet the poorest countries in the world are already 25% poorer than the richest countries in the world thanks to climate change. That's what made me become a climate scientist, to do everything I could to help fix this problem. And I thought naively at the time, it's so urgent, surely we'll fix it soon, and then I can go back to studying galaxies. As you can see, that hasn't happened yet. But where we are today is one more step along that road to truly fixing it so we can all get on with everything else that matters in life. Climate change is the hurdle that stands between us and a better future.
I think so relevant, and the fact that I'm hearing you bring it down to the individual, the fact that this is not just an us or them, it's everyone, and we're really feeling it on the day-to-day. And if you could talk just a little bit about, or touch a bit more on how climate change interacts with the individual, what is that play between the two of them?
So often we think of climate change as an issue about Antarctica or polar bears. And Antarctica and polar bears are very vulnerable to climate change, but so are we, every single one of us. First of all, the place we live. Wherever we live, we are already experiencing the impacts of climate change today. And it's not just through gradually warming temperatures or shifting rainfall patterns. A lot of it is through what I call global weirding. And you'll be familiar with that because I actually have a YouTube series called Global Weirding. And the reason I called it that is because we see things getting weirder. We see heat waves when we shouldn't be having heat waves. We see heavy downpours followed by record-breaking droughts. We see stronger hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons. We see wildfire burning greater and greater area, choking the skies with smoke all the way from the west coast to the east coast of North America. We see things just getting weird. And wherever we live, whoever we are, whatever we care about, we are seeing the impacts of climate change here and now in ways that are relevant to us, in ways that we did not see 10 years ago. Every single one of us is being affected. And that's why, to care about climate change, we don't have to be an environmentalist. We don't have to be a certain type of person living in a certain place, caring about certain things. We only have to be one thing. And that one thing, you can probably guess what I'm going to say now, that one thing is quite literally a human being living on planet Earth. And if we're that, then we care. And if we don't think we care, we just haven't connected the dots between how climate change affects us and how that matters to our lives.
Yeah, soon Scotland might be our tropical paradise, our tropical island getaway. And something that we've chatted about a bit backstage and before is the fact that social sciences play a huge role in climate change. And I love that, the fact that this is all interconnected. And I believe you did do a study with Yale on climate change communication, sort of in that realm. So can you expand on the social sciences, on climate change communication as a whole?
Yes, so as someone coming from the field of physical sciences, I always thought to myself, surely if we just tell people the facts, they'll get it, right? And we scientists have been thinking that for a very long time. If you stacked all the IPCC reports up, back to back, they would reach above our head. If you Google how many peer-reviewed scientific studies have been published on climate change, the number is in the millions. We have been providing the facts to people since the 1800s. That's how long it's been since scientists discovered that digging up and burning coal back then, and then, it was not a good thing, exactly, produces heat-trapping gases that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. You'll be familiar with Mrs. Eunice Foote, whose obituary was finally published in the New York Times 2 years ago. She, in 1856, concluded that if carbon dioxide levels were higher, the planet would be warmer.
1896.
56.
56.
In 1896, Svante Arrhenius, who is actually a distant cousin of Greta Thunberg's, calculated in his spare time between winning the Nobel Prize in physical chemistry, on the weekends, he decided to calculate how much the planet would warm if we doubled or tripled levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. He did it by hand. He calculated the first climate model in the world by hand, and his numbers were pretty much right on where we are today. So we thought that if we just told people the facts, they would change their minds. But what we've seen over the last 20 years is they didn't. And in fact, climate denial has risen in the last 20 years. What changed? Not the science. What changed was the framing of the issue. People didn't understand why it mattered, and they had aversion to the solutions. They were told that the only solutions were negative or punitive or harmful, would decrease their quality of life, be too expensive or unpleasant. And so denial arose, and we scientists just kept filing on the facts, and the more facts we piled on, the stronger the denial got. The social science is key to understanding the real problem psychological distance and solution aversion, and addressing those problems by bringing climate change here and now in ways that are relevant and concrete, and always, always pairing that information on risks with information on solutions that are beneficial, that are affordable, that give us cleaner air, cleaner water, a safer life, a better life, a more just and equitable and inclusive society. That is the message that we haven't heard enough of, but we're starting to hear today. I was actually on a panel just yesterday with the UK government. They had released 2 new scientific studies. One was the risks we face, and the other was the future we choose. I was like, that is exactly the coin, the 2 sides of the coin that we need to be talking about.
Right. And if we could sort of delve a little deeper into that for those who are having conversations around climate change, maybe with climate deniers or having a tough conversation, what advice would you give to me or to our watchers on how do you have that difficult conversation? What is a good step to take to create that communication channel?
Mm-hmm. So over the last few years, I track the questions that I get from people. And the most common question I've gotten is, what gives you hope? And the second most common question is, how do I talk about this issue? To my family member, my friend, my neighbor, my colleague, my coworker, person I know, person I work with, how do I have those conversations? It's so important because using our voice is the most important force that we have to catalyze action. How do we act if we don't communicate? Communication is the first step that catalyzes whatever action that is, whether it's our company taking action, our city taking action, our school, our university, our place of worship, our club, our organization. Whoever we are, that action begins with talking. And so when I say that, people often immediately assume I know exactly who I'm going to talk to. I'm going to talk to that one person in my life who is obsessed with the idea that this isn't real. Every time I post online, every time I have a conversation with them, every dinner we sit down to, they bring up something about how it's all a hoax, or those climate scientists are making it up for the money, or, it's all volcanoes, or it's just about destroying the economy. I have some bad news and some good news. Let's go with the bad news first. Those people who are obsessed with the idea that it's a hoax are what we call dismissives. And dismissives will dismiss everything. They will dismiss 200 years of climate science. They will dismiss 2,000 climate scientists. They will dismiss 2 million scientific studies. They will dismiss everything. In fact, my personal definition of a dismissive is someone who, if an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone that said global warming is real and foot-high letters of flame appeared to them, they would dismiss them. And if they would dismiss that, why would they listen to us? They won't. That's the bad news.
We're going to have to leave them behind.
We do, but here's the good news. The good news is they are 7% of the population in the United States. Now, yes, I understand they're loud. I hear from them on social media every single day. I understand that they are disproportionately represented in the comment sections of newspaper or in comments on social media or in Washington, D.C. But they're only 7% of the population, and that means that we can have constructive conversations with the other 93%. And did you know that 70% of people in the US are already worried about climate change? 83% of mothers are worried about climate change. 84% of young people in 10 major countries around the world are worried about climate change. Most of us are worried, but we feel hopeless and helpless. We don't understand why it matters, and we don't understand what to do about it. So where do we start these positive, constructive conversations with anyone but the 7%ers? Begin from the heart rather than the head. Begin with something that you care about, a person, a place, a thing, an activity that is near and dear to your heart, and connect the dots to why it might matter to them too. So I don't hunt, and I don't really fish either, so I'm not a great person to talk to people who fish and hunt, but there are people who do that, and they're great people to connect the dots with people who share their passions. What we can do is do an inventory of ourselves. And actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask everybody to do that, including you, Lauren.
Thinking.
So I'm going to start in this example, and then I'm going to ask you for your inventory. And I want everybody to do your own inventory in your head, or if you have a little piece of paper, go ahead and write it down yourself. Do your inventory of who you are, and those are the conversations that you can start with people. Okay, so first of all, I am Canadian, so I can talk about how climate change affects Canada. I live in Texas, which is an incredibly vulnerable state in the country to climate impacts, to global weirding. I am a scientist, so I do love to talk science with people. I'm also a mom, and I love to talk about my son, and also I care passionately about his future. I love skiing, and for skiing, you need snow. I understand here in Glasgow they ski on mats. I would really prefer snow. I love spending time in the outdoors. I grew up on lakes. Lakes, if they get too warm, they get choked with algae. I'm a Christian, and I believe that we are to love others and care for others, which includes caring for their physical needs and directly addressing the injustices that we see in this world. As I talk about in my book, Saving Us, I am a knitter, and I have even started conversations over knitting. Like what? Like you could knit the warming stripes into a scarf, and then you could wear it. You could tell people, there you go, see? So that's my inventory, and that's where I can begin conversations with people, connect the dots to how climate change matters if you live in Canada or Texas, or you're a mom, or you're a skier, or you're a Christian, or you love lakes, or you knit, and then talk about positive, constructive solutions that are being done in Canada, or in Texas, or by mothers, or by companies that we use, or by faith-based organizations, or by people who ski or snowboard, or skate, like Protect Our Winters, or even by people who knit, like Tempestry. They actually create knitting warming stripes kits that you can buy. Talk about a positive, constructive solution and begin from the heart. So let's hear your inventory, Lauren.
Yes, I'd love to tell you all a little bit about me. So I'm from California. We're always on fire, so it'd be great to save California in that sense. My father grew up in Jamaica, where actually a lot of solutions are coming out and where voices should be given, and that community is one of the harder hits in climate change, given that it's a small island, just like my mother, who's from Taiwan, who is also being hit by climate change, typhoons, and being a small island nation. So that's huge for me. I love yoga as well. We're seeing reusable yoga mats coming out. And I mean, there's so many more. I could go on, but yeah, I'm a daughter. So just as you're a mother, I'm a daughter, and I'd love to make sure where my parents are, they're okay, and they're not going to be flooded or some sort of other natural disaster or on fire.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a great exercise. So I hope everyone's been kind of keeping track of their own list inside, both here and on the web. And yeah, maybe I'll jump on now that you know a little bit more about Catherine and I, because you mentioned Saving Us, and I did really want to touch on that book because it's recently out. It's really exciting, and for those of you who don't know, there's actually only one chapter on the actual science behind climate change. Why is that? Where are we going with this?
Yeah, so my new book just came out a few weeks ago in Canada and the US, and just this past week in the UK.
Congrats.
You can get it anywhere books are sold. And it's called Saving Us, first of all, because it is quite literally not about saving the planet. The planet is going to be orbiting the sun long after we are gone. The question is, will we? It is about saving us, and by us, I want to be very clear, I mean human civilization and many of the other living things that share this planet with us. That's what this is about. So I'm a climate scientist. I'm a physical climate scientist. I study this planet that we live on. I study how it supports our life. I study how the choices that we make inform our future. Yet I wrote a book that only had one chapter of climate science in it.
Shocking.
I know. Why did I do that? It's because it refers right back to what we were talking about before. It's not that we lack the facts. 70% of us in the US are worried. 75% in Canada and the UK are worried. 84% of young people are already worried. What do we lack? We lack hope, and we lack the ability to act. We don't understand why it matters here and now and what we can do to fix it. So that is what the book is about. It's about how every single one of us has a role to play in saving us, and it begins with using our voice as a catalyst for action wherever we are. Using our voice not to dump more doom-filled facts on people who are already worried, not to point accusing, judgmental fingers of guilt at people who are just trying to do their best and that's the only way they can get their kids to school, but rather to talk about why it matters, starting from the heart again, rather than the head, why it matters, and what we could do working together to fix it. And so in the book is full of stories. Stories about individual people, not big, famous, rich, influential people, Very ordinary people. You will not have met most of the people in the book, but you will see people you know, so to speak, in the book, because it's about ordinary people who have used their voice in the place where they are to make a difference and to actually affect change in the world. And through all these examples of the things that are happening, we can see, you know what, hey, if they could do that, I could do that too. We can all do that where we are. We talk a lot in climate circles about our carbon footprint, which is the amount of carbon that's produced by our activities, which include traveling and living and eating. But what we often don't realize is we all have something bigger than our footprint, much bigger than our footprint, something that extends through space and through time, and that's our climate shadow. How do we activate our climate shadow, our influence on other people? How do we activate that? By using our voice, by writing, by speaking, by sharing on social media, by engaging with people and how together we can affect change. That is how we engage our shadow. And through our shadow, again, we can reach across space and time to quite literally change the world.
And I'm reaching out to your shadow right
Yes.
here, and we can work together on that.
I love that.
And yeah, so I'd love to open it up to Q&A session if any of you have questions for Catherine. And I'm seeing a hand up right here already, so we'll just jump right into them.
Yeah, it's working. I was going to ask, obviously it's really important to connect with people on a personal level, on an individual level, but where does that leave kind of the people with power or who have, very large reach? Mm-hmm. Do you feel optimistic about whether they are starting to actually connect with this issue? I mean, that's a really general statement, but yeah. Do you think that the action that people are starting to think about their own inventories, people with real power?
I think that they are, but let me rephrase it this way. We often think, well, I'm just one person, what difference can I make? Our systems are made up of people. Our governments are made up of people. The biggest corporations in the world are made up of people. And for every corporation or every city or state or provincial or national government where the person in charge decides, yes, we want to change, we want a net zero goal, or we want more sustainable practices, or we want to be nature positive, for every example of the leader who makes that decision, I could probably give you conservatively 10, probably more like 100 examples of a case where it was someone who was not the person in charge, who said, you know what, we really can do better, we should do better, we must do better. And what did they do? They used their voice. Take Amazon as an example. It wasn't the head of Amazon who woke up one morning and just spontaneously decided that Amazon needed to do better. It was employees of Amazon who worked for Amazon. People of no particular, again, power or wealth or fame, but who had a voice and used their voice within their community to say that we can and we must do differently. Why do universities like Harvard divest? It is not because the board decided to. It's because students and professors and faculty raised their voices to say, this is what we need to do to be true to our values. Why does change happen? When you look back through the history of industrialized society, when we look at how and why slavery was eventually abolished in the UK, when we look at how apartheid was ended in South Africa, how civil rights were enacted in the United States, how women got the vote, it was never because the King of England or the President of the United States or the National Party of South Africa just sort of woke up one morning and decided the world had to change. It was because very ordinary people of no particular influence or fame decided the world could and should and must be different. And they used their voices, and because of that, we know a few of their names. But there are thousands of names that we do not know, yet we stand in their shadow today. And why is that? It's because they used their voice to call for action, to catalyze that action, that at that moment when they started looked hopeless. But they continued, they persevered, and the world has changed profoundly.
That was absolutely lovely, and something I think we can all walk away from being, we are part of that movement, all of us being here right now, listening to this, out there marching, we are part of that legacy. And I feel like it's really a legacy that we're leaving behind.
It is a legacy. We stand in their legacy and we leave a legacy too. And the way I would say it is this: we very ordinary people, we're the only ones who have ever changed the world before in this modern world that we live in. And so we are the ones who can and must do it again today. And we see this week. I stood beside the march to look at every face as it passed, and I saw young children with huge smiles on their faces. I saw grandparents looking worried. I saw young people, I saw older people, I saw people of faith, I saw indigenous peoples, I saw people supporting all kinds of different technologies, I saw people supporting different political positions. I saw a complete cross-section of humanity. Why? Because climate change is an everything issue, and I saw people using their voices to call for the change that we need.
Absolutely beautiful to see in action and to be part of. I don't know if we have any other questions, but I do have one that I want to jump to if anyone's queuing one up, but shoot your hand up to stop me otherwise.
And wave it so we can see it. Oh, I see a hand waving.
There is one, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, it's very hard to see with the lights.
It is. They turned up the lights slightly.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned that 7% of the world is only 7% of the world are very harsh denialists or, won't change. But we hear also a lot of greenwashing these days. And I read a newspaper title recently that said, greenwashing is the new form of denialism. How do you answer that? What's your position on that? How do we switch from more communication to actual action?
So 7% of the United States is dismissive, and those numbers are smaller in other countries. But you're right, they're disproportionately concentrated in certain areas. So the point of denial is to prevent action. That's the point of denial. So 10 years ago, there were many politicians saying it isn't real. And then when they shifted from it isn't real to it isn't us, people said, progress. They admit it's at least happening. And I said, no progress. Because the whole point is to avoid action. And then when they shifted to, okay, fine, it's real and it's human caused, but it's not serious, people said, progress. And I said, no progress, because if it's not serious, why act? And then now they've shifted to, it's too expensive to act. And everybody says, progress. I meant, no progress. And now with that, people are saying we're doing something when they're not actually doing much. And everybody says, is that progress? I say, no, it's not. Because what matters is what we actually produce. The carbon we produce, the emission reductions that we create, the resilience that we build, that's what matters, not what we say, but what we do. Now again, don't get me wrong, what we say is the catalyst for what we do if we're actually using it to spur change. But if we're just talking to cover our lack of action, that accomplishes absolutely nothing. And so that's why, as a climate scientist, I'm really proud to have joined the Nature Conservancy this past summer. It was something I was not expecting to do. I am a scientist. I work at a university, and I do a lot of climate communication. But I joined them because I believe that they hold some of the key solutions to the issues that we're talking about right now. How do you set clear, transparent standards that if a company truly wants to get on board, they have to be able to tick these boxes in a way that everybody can see, they ticked all these boxes, they're actually doing all these things. Okay, now we can work with them and we can do things, because we need to work with people as long as they're willing to work with us. We need to do this together. We can't draw lines in the sand and say you all aren't allowed to work on the solutions. Everybody who wants to genuinely be part of the solutions has to be part of this tent. But the key word there, of course, is genuine. So we need these measures, we need these standards, we need. I was at an event last night where they said the accountants might save the world now. The climate scientists can pass the baton to the accountants.
Counting is sexy.
Yeah, exactly. I felt very relieved when they said that. I was like, oh yes, I can pass the baton, I would love to. But what did they mean by that? They meant that accountants are able to measure and to track and to provide that information that helps us trust whether or not governments, organizations, and corporations are doing what they promised to or not. And so I really look forward to seeing what accountants are going to bring us in the next few years.
That's perfect. And I know we're coming up on time, so I'll just close with a question. And we've talked about communication, talking about hope. I'm wondering if you could just leave a message for us, for what you want us to walk away with, what you want us to hope for this week, this session, right now, right here.
So often, I mentioned the biggest question I get is what gives you hope, and that's why I wrote my book. We place our hope in the success of a specific policy or a specific conference or a specific politician or a specific person. And when it doesn't live up to our expectations, we're disappointed. And the more disappointed we get, the more depressed we get about it. The more depressed we get about it, the more fearful we get. The more fearful we get, the more paralyzed we get. Until today, we are seeing a serious uptick in levels of severe anxiety, depression, paralysis, concern, panic. And believe me, when you look at the problem, there is certainly every scientific reason for every single one of those emotions. So first of all, those emotions are valid. And those emotions are emotions we have to acknowledge that we have. Here is the question. Do we allow them to overcome us, to paralyze us, to sweep us under, so to speak? Or do we use that as a catalyst, motivation, to use our voice to call for change and to call for action? A singer, Joan Baez, from many decades ago, said something that I think is very relevant to today. She said, "The antidote to despair is action." And as Greta says, she says, "Don't look for hope. Instead, act, because when you act, hope is everywhere." And it's true. When we act, we understand that the giant boulder of climate action is not sitting at the bottom of the hill with only a few hands trying to push it, and it's not even budging an inch. That giant boulder is already at the top of the hill. It is already rolling down the hill in the right direction, and it already has millions of hands on it. And when we add our hand, it will go a tiny bit faster. When we encourage the people who we work with, the people on our team if we play ultimate frisbee, the people in our school, the people who we know, when we encourage them to add their hands to the boulder, it will go a little bit faster too. And as we add our hands, that boulder keeps going faster and faster and faster. And when we need to take a break, there's other hands who will step in for us. But we realize, looking around us to the left and to the right, which you can do right now. Look at the person to the left and to the right. They're here because they care about this issue. We are not alone. Change is happening, and every single one of us has a role to play, and that is what gives me hope.
And that is absolutely beautiful, and now I'm as hopeful as you are. So thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you all for joining us today, whether it's here or online.
Thank you.